Welcome back to GlowPOP Reads. The story I'm currently reading is Bendy and the Ink Machine, Dreams Come to Life by Adrian Kress. If you haven't seen the previous chapter, I suggest you listen to that before this one, so you can catch up with what's going on. But if you've already done so, I hope you'll enjoy this one. Also, be sure to subscribe, leave comments, and click the bell for more content. Don't forget to support me on other social media sites, and feel free to leave me a coffee as well. Links are in the description. And now, on with the story. Chapter 15. The Wail. That same wail from the infirmary, but this time, almost more like a roar. It ripped through the darkness, pierced my brain, and I felt that familiar paralyzed feeling come over me. I was trapped. This was it. This was it. Dot took control and pulled my arm hard, and forced me to move, to follow her mad dash across the room, as a loud thud and sounds of scraping and wet panting filled the room. We kept running, away from everything, not knowing what has happened or where we were. We crashed into the lip of the stage hard, falling into the music stands, dropping the flashlight, and I grappled to pull myself forward while still holding her hand. "Buddy, stop, listen," she whispered hard into my ear. I couldn't stop. I didn't dare stop. We had to get away. Somehow. "Listen." I scratched at the stage, feeling splinters under my nails. "Stop!" She shouted it, out loud, loud so anyone or anything could hear. I stopped. I stopped even though my whole body was shaking, even though everything in me was demanding I flee. Silence. Not the terrible silence from before. A different kind of silence. I heard Dot in the silence. I heard her searching for something, and then a solid beam of light. I turned to look at her face still in shadow, but now visible in the fringe of the light. It was so good to see her face again. She nodded at me, to tell me she was okay, and then turned the beam. The violinist was gone. The thing was gone. All that remained was a black, inky stain. Dot shone the light up. Nothing. Just more ink. Dripping a little. Now I could hear it. The faint single drip every so often. She searched the room with the flashlight one more time. But even as she did, I knew we both knew that whatever it was, whatever that thing was, it was gone. The shadows were gone. Finally, Dot turned, the beam aiming down again, and said, "Are you okay?" I didn't know how to answer that question. I wasn't hurt, but the fear, the horror of what we'd seen, it felt like I was. Like I was on the inside. Like when a person is bleeding on the inside. Light suddenly blasted through the room, blinding me. I held up my hand to my face. What was happening now? My heart was racing and I couldn't swallow, terrified of the beast. "Norman?" called out Dot. I moved my arm away from my face. It was still too bright to see much, but I could make out Dot beside me looking up toward the back wall. So I did too. All I could see was a bright white circle of light above me, glowing. "Norman? Is that you?" Dot hollered again. "Hey, little lady," said a familiar voice from upstairs. "What on earth are you doing here?" She shielded the light from her eyes, so I did the same. "Well now, I could ask you the same question," he said. I stared at the bright light. It felt wrong, almost like we were talking to the projector and not a real person. "Did you see it? Did you see what happened?" asked Dot. There was a pause. "You two all right?" he replied. "We're all right. Did you see what happened?" asked Dot. "Not this time," he said. "Heard it, though. That's why I came." Dot turned to me. Let's go talk to him." I immediately shook my head. The entrance to the projector booth was outside the door. No way. No way was I leaving this room. Not now. Not without something out there. "Come on. It's safe," she said in a soothing voice. "We just need to watch the light." "Safe?" I asked. I couldn't believe it. "Are you kidding me? We have to get out of here."
"You two should probably wait a bit before heading back to the elevator, just in case," said Norman. "She's right about the light."
"How do you know?" I asked, turning abruptly. I shouted it at him, angry. What did any of us really know about that thing? It didn't make sense in the first place, so how could they know we'd be safe out there?
"I know," said Norman.
"Come on," said Dot. I shook my head again, but of course I couldn't hold Dot back, and I was definitely not staying behind. I followed her to the door, and she opened it carefully, shining her flashlight around the corner. She looked back at me. "All good. Steady beam." And then, there I was, hard in my throat, racing out of the music room following Dot, up the stairs and into the small balcony area that served as Norman's projector booth, slamming the door fast behind me. A wave of relief washed over me. But in place of the fear, the reality of everything that had happened to us really hit me. That thing, that inky thing, the violinist, her body on the ground, lying there. It was too much. Too much. I stared out of the booth at the room below, holding tightly onto the railing. The flashing, blinding light of the projector made a perfect rectangle on the back wall of the music room. It flickered and lit the room, revealing the chaos in even more detail. The ink on the walls, the floor, that spot on the floor where the violinist had been. I leaned over the railing and looked closer. The ink stain looked smeared, like her body had been dragged somewhere, until the ink got fainter and fainter, and then vanished. "Hi, Norman," I heard Dot say. She sounded as exhausted as I felt. I turned and watched as she sat on a box filled with metal film reels. I had nowhere to put myself, so I leaned uncomfortably against the railing.
"Y'all happy with yourselves now? See what happens when you sneak around all the time? You two and your sneaking," he said, shaking his head. He took a sip from a mug, but I wasn't certain it was coffee in there.
"You've been watching us?" asked Dot.
Norman laughed to himself. "Never seen a pair of teenagers sneak around so much like you two, and yet not fool around at all." I choked on nothing then and started to cough. "Sensitive boy, ain't he?" asked Norman, looking at Dot. "That was a pretty rude thing to say, though," she said back. Norman shrugged. "Do you know what's going on?" she asked. Again, he shrugged. Dot sighed hard. "Norman, you invited us up here. I thought you wanted to talk." "Well," he said, slowly taking another sip from his mug and leaning back in his chair.
It seemed so casual and not at all how I was feeling, and it only made me get more tense. Norman thought for a moment, and in that moment, I realized how much he looked like a character from a comic strip. An old gentleman sitting on his front porch. He had a cravat instead of a tie.
"If I say you're right, what happens next?"
His lined face glowed in the flickering projector, and his bushy eyebrows had such a steep point in the middle, it made him look almost devilish. "Next, you tell us," said Dot. Norman glanced at me, gave me the once-over, like people did that first week I was here, but it was like he hadn't really looked at me before now.
"Is that what you want to know?" he asked me.
Of course. It was an easy answer. I felt tense and pretty sure we should be getting out of here immediately, but still, if we were going to wait this out until whenever, then yeah, of course we wanted to know what the heck was going on.
"Of course," Norman said to himself. He took another sip. "He says it like that, knowing that he's the one who brought this creature upon us. Of course, of course."
I felt cold then, Like the temperature had dropped and it was winter. Like if I talked, my breath would freeze.
What do you mean?
But I knew what he meant. He meant the infirmary. The thing in the room with the locked door. The door I'd opened. I'd let it out. Me. It was all my fault.
What do you two know about the ink? Norman asked instead.
We know Sammy is obsessed with it, said Dot.
So not much then, said Norman.
How much do you know? I asked, trying to hold it together.
Everything.
Dot shifted in her seat, and I couldn't tell if it was because she was excited to get the truth or annoyed he was being so cagey. Tell us, I said.
How much? He asked.
All of it, I said. Yes, said Dot with an edge to her voice.
Okay, calm down. You're acting like you've somewhere to go, when we all know no one here in the studio has anywhere to go.
I didn't know what that meant. The beginning, Norman, said Dot. Norman nodded.
The beginning.
He leaned back with his mug and put his feet up on the edge of the table, holding the projector.
How familiar are y'all with Henry?
Chapter 16. Henry. The name that had been haunting me since day one. The name etched in my desk. The name Mr. Drew had called me when we were trying on tuxedos. That name I just assumed was some former employee. And who really needs to know about that anyway? Mr. Drew's former business partner, said Dot. Helped fund Joey Drew Studios. He created Bendy. He created Bendy? I said, shocked. I always assumed...
A lot of people assume that, said Norman. It ain't like Mr. Drew corrects them.
That made me feel uncomfortable. The implication there. He created the big three, didn't he? Asked Dot.
Bendy and Boris, even Alice, though they didn't start featuring her until after Henry left. Yep, he was a gifted artist. Decent fellow too, as far as people go.
Coming from you, that's quite the compliment, said Dot. Norman barked out a laugh.
I guess.
But what does Henry have to do with the ink? I wanted to get on with the story. I didn't need to know about Henry and Mr. Drew.
Well, Henry left. Y'all know that. He left. Wanted to spend more time with his wife, Linda. You get that. This job can be... consuming.
Sure, said Dot. I nodded but swallowed hard. I thought about all the late nights. I thought about trying to prove myself. I thought about how I hadn't had a good conversation with Ma in a long time.
How do you think a man like Joey Drew takes that?
Takes what? I asked.
The leaving. Mr. Drew had the vision, but Henry, he had the talent. Talent's gone. What now? It ain't personal, but maybe Mr. Drew takes it like it is. Maybe he decides he don't need Henry. Never did. Just needs the talent.
None of this was making any sense. And with everything that just happened, the thought of some monster outside the door, and this feeling, this pit in the stomach feeling, hearing the word vision, I just couldn't put it all together. Okay, so Mr. Drew hires talented people. We know that, said Dot.
And we know the cartoons do okay for a while, after Henry leaves. Alice was popular for a beat. So was the original actress, Susie. You ever meet her? Asked Norman to Dot.
Once, she replied.
Cute kid. He finished up his drink and placed the mug on the table. But still, it doesn't last. All the talent in the world and it doesn't last. He starts spending money on that amusement park he ain't ever going to build.
Of course Norman knew about that, too. And the theater, I said, almost more to myself.
What theater? Asked Norman.
The studio starts to fail, said Dot, getting us back on track.
Norman nodded. He needs something, anything, to get the studio back in the papers again. get investors excited again. That's when it finally clicked.
The machine, I said. Tom Connor.
Yes, said Norman, looking at me. So you know about the machine then, he said, like he approved.
Kind of, I said. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, just to check if the light was still as bright. It was. We know that there is one. We know Tom Connor is working on it, said Dot.
Was, corrected Norman.
Was?
I asked. Norman raised an eyebrow at me. Was.
There was a silence where I suppose we were meant to ask him why. But then Dot asked a different question, getting us back on track, as she always did. What does the machine have to do with ink?
It needs ink to work.
The pipe, I blurted.
What pipe? Asked Dot.
I thought it was strange, that first day, when Sammy was covered in ink and I had to clean it up. It was from a burst pipe in the closet. The pipe was flowing with ink, but how does it...
Norman cut me off. I don't know how, and I don't know what's going on. All I know is that all this ink goes in and comes out, and when it comes out, it's different somehow.
Different ink. I thought about it. Now that the pieces had started coming together, things were making more sense in my messed up mind. I could solve more problems. The ink Sammy was looking for was crazy for, I said, carefully making eye contact with Dot. Yes, she said. Of course. Why would he care so much about regular ink? It's everywhere. We are an animation studio. We have it everywhere. Everywhere, I said. The machine, Dot said, turning back to Norman and leaning forward. You said Mr. Drew needs the ink for the machine. Norman, what does the machine do? I held my breath waiting for the answer. I almost felt like I didn't want to know it. Norman just shook his head. He took his feet off the table and sat up.
I wish I knew. I only watched what I could see. And Mr. Drew and that Tom Connor fellow, they were more sneaky than you two. I just know that Sammy isn't Sammy anymore. The ink, well, I don't know. But it seems to me like the ink has taken him over. I think it's the ink that took him.
You think he's alive? Asked Dot.
I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing. That ink has a mind of its own. Goes where it likes.
Slips off the page, I said, thinking about my cowboy bendy, thinking about Sammy's notebook, thinking about a kind of panic I'd never felt before, not even when the monster was chasing us. Something animalistic and deep down, something past my gut and right into my spine, overtook me in a moment of pure, white-hot realization. I have the ink, I said. I took a bottle from the supply closet. From Sammy's stash.
Well, by now the studio was overrun with it. Mr. Drew saw to that, said Norman.
No, he didn't. That's not fair, I shouted. But even as I did, I thought about my grandfather looking at Mr. Drew's hand. The words, bad ink. No, it wasn't that. It couldn't be that. You said it yourself, that he hires people with talent, I said to Norman, and he's the one with vision, so none of this was his fault. It's that Tom Connor, or maybe Sammy. I was shaking now. All my feelings were mashed together as fear. I couldn't pick them apart. I couldn't split my realization about the ink from the conversation about Mr. Drew, or from the creature and the violinist and the shadows. The grasping, clawing shadows. All of it was just one big ball of fear. Buddy, calm down, said Dot. I can't. You don't understand. I have to go. I did. I had to go. It's okay, buddy. We should wait a bit longer, said Dot, standing up and coming over to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I can't. Don't you understand? I have the ink. I have the ink at home. It's in my apartment. I pulled her hand off me and ran out of the projector booth. I didn't worry if I'd hurt her. I didn't worry if Norman thought I was crazy, and I also didn't worry that the creature might find me and catch me. I didn't worry about any of it, because I wasn't thinking. I wasn't processing. I was just doing. I was running home. So, that was the end of both chapters 15 and 16. Another double chapter whammy, can you believe it? So what did you think? Did you enjoy the chapters? If so, feel free to leave your comments, like the video, and share it around if you want me to continue. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is GlowPOP Artisan, or the Apple Lady, signing off. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Stay safe, stay sane, and stay sweet, my apples. And thank you all for helping me reach over 1,300 subscribers. More content to come soon. And with that, I say to you, ciao!